Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am a burn survivor. I was burned over 70% of my body when I was 14 years old. I spent 3 weeks in a coma. I've had over 4 dozen surgeries, and I spent almost 8 months in a hospital. And based on statistics and medical history at that time, the doctors didn't even expect me to survive. Let me stop right here and ask the question. Based on what I've just shared with you, how many of you would agree that I've had some serious problems in my life? Almost everyone raised their hand. You know, it always amazes me how often people give me the wrong answer to that question. And everyone who raised their hand, you were wrong. You see, I haven't had any problems in my life. What I've had are some unique opportunities to tap into that inner strength, which is something that we all possess. And because of my experiences, I've come to learn that problems don't exist. A problem is a perception and not a situation. And I've also realized that how you perceive a situation has a direct influence on how you deal with that situation. And how you deal with that situation has a direct influence on how successful you are. And I say that all of life's successes are based on a combination of believing in yourself, having a strong support system in place, and taking control of your life. And what I like to do is to share a little bit of my history to sort of illustrate the importance of nourishing these resources and using these resources as a vital part of our personal growth and development. I'll pick up my story after my discharge from the hospital, which was a place I wasn't really expected ever to leave, at least not alive. But I did leave. And what I'd like to use my story is to sort of illustrate the importance of taking control of your life, the importance of having a strong support system in place, and believing in yourself. And I thought that with all the physical pain that I endured while I was in the hospital, I didn't think that it could get any worse than that. But it did get worse. It got a lot worse. You see, I soon realized that my emotional recovery was going to be far more difficult and painful than anything I'd endured so far. Going home for me was really the beginning of a long and lonely isolation. You see, I kept myself hidden away from society for 2 years because I was so ashamed of my appearance. You see, I didn't think that I could live with this disfigured body, and I was sure that the world would not be able to accept this ugly monster that I thought I'd become. Even my little sister, she was afraid of me. And this was the same person that used to run behind me crying whenever I'd go to the door because she wanted to go with me. And I'd take her with me. I'd take her with me to the baseball diamond. I'd take her with me over to the football field, and we'd pal around together. I mean, this was my little buddy. But now she wasn't crying because she wanted to go with me. Now she was crying because she couldn't come near me, because she was afraid of me. And you can't imagine how painful that was for me. And I remember once waking up from a nap and finding my sister sitting outside my bedroom door in the hallway. And I don't know how long she'd been there playing with her toys, but she'd fallen asleep, and her head was leaning against the wall. And she had her toys scattered around her, her doll, her balls, and her jack. And I was very moved by that. And I took a blanket, and I put a blanket over her, and I kissed her on the forehead, and I began to cry. You see, this was the first time that my sister and I had made physical contact since my incident. And I began to realize that this horrible thing that had happened to me, it not only changed me physically, but it also changed the relationships in my life. But my tears, they weren't only tears of sadness, they were also tears of joy. Because through my sister's fear, her anxiety, and her confusion, she still had a love for me, and she still had a need to be whatever support to me she could be. And though she was afraid of me and wouldn't come in my room, she wanted to be near me, so she sat outside my door. And that was very, very special to me. That was very important for me. And even my brothers and sisters, my other brothers and sisters, when they'd have company at the house, I would retreat even further to my room. Not just because I was ashamed of my appearance, but because I didn't want to embarrass them. And they would always bring their company up to my room to say hello to me. And that was very important because what they were saying is, Dennis, we're not ashamed of you. It doesn't matter what you look like. You're still our brother, and we love you for the person you are on the inside. And these lessons were very important for me because it made me realize that it's not the body that's essential. It's that wonderful spirit that we have inside. I mean, it's that life force that keeps you moving ahead. And that was important.
You see,
I get a little emotional sometimes when I talk about this, so just bear with me. You see, my family believed in me and loved me, even when I didn't believe or love myself. And as I sat in my room, looking out the window, watching the seasons change, I realized that I was quite literally watching life pass me by. And I knew that if I was ever going to make a change, I was going to have to begin to make that step. And I realized that we could either be the victim of our lives or we can be the victor of our lives. We can be the victim and remain in the situation that we're in and become stagnant and go nowhere. Or we can become the victor by taking control of our lives and proactively changing our situation. And I was afraid. I mean, I was very, very afraid. But I knew that if I was ever going to reestablish a life for myself, I was going to have to take that first step. I was going to have to begin somewhere. You see, I didn't know what the world had in store for me, but I knew that I wasn't happy with my current situation, and I had to make a change. And I began to realize that it didn't matter how afraid I was. I had to take that step. You see, we can't let our fears paralyze us and keep us from creating a vision for our future and acting on that vision. And that was very important. For me, I can't imagine where my life would be today if I hadn't made that first step. To give you an example, when I went back to school, you see, stepping out there, it forced me to deal with one of my biggest fears, and that fear was rejection. No one wants to be rejected. And when I went back to school, I'll never forget kids pointing at me and laughing. I wouldn't even take a lunch period because I was afraid of spoiling someone's appetite. And I remember running home every day crying. And I wasn't just crying because of what people said about me, the horrible things they said. I was also crying because I agreed with them. I agreed with all the horrible things they said because my self-esteem was shot. And I drew some encouragement from a story that I once read. And it was a story about a woman who dreamed she was being chased by a large, hideous monster. And everywhere the woman would run, the monster would be right behind her, snarling and breathing down her neck. And the woman found herself at a dead end. And she turned and she faced the monster. And she watched as the monster came closer and closer and closer. And when the monster was within inches of her, she cried out at the top of her lungs, "What horrible things are you going to do to me?" And the monster paused, and he looked at her, and he hunched his shoulders. "I don't know. It's your dream." And it was at that moment that the woman could decide to have the monster devour her, or she could turn the monster into a handsome prince, or she can have the monster disappear altogether. You see, she was in control of her dream, and she was responsible how it would play out. And I compared that dream to my life. And I realized that all of us, we sometimes create monsters out of our own self-image. And I decided that I would stop looking at myself as being different, as being a monster, and as being weird, because the world can only view us as we view ourselves. So I began to count the number of times during the course of a day that people would make derogatory remarks about me. And I would multiply that number by 10. And that would be the number of times that I would go home and stare in the mirror and repeat, I love me. And I would repeat it over and over and over again. You see, I couldn't control what people thought about me or what they said about me. But I could control how it affected me. And at first I thought I was going crazy. And I thought I was losing my mind, talking to myself in the mirror. And as time went on, I began to listen to myself. And you know a strange thing that happened? I actually began to believe it. I really began to love myself. And when I began to really develop a love for myself, I imagine that I even began to look different. And once I began having a positive view of myself, my world became a more positive place, and it began to move in a positive direction. To give you an example, in school, I went from being an odd, strange joke to actually becoming quite popular. I came in second place for senior class president, and I went on to graduate in the top of my class, and I'm very proud of that. And from there, I've gone on to become a moderately successful businessman, and I consider myself somewhat of an entrepreneur, to where I am today, currently realizing my destiny as a speaker. And what does speaking mean to me? Speaking affords me an opportunity to share and to give something back to a world that has given me so much. And I think we all have to give something back. We have an obligation. Because life asks a contribution from each and every one of us. And it's up to us to decide what our contribution is going to be. For me, I went from hiding in my house for 2 years because I was ashamed of my appearance to now, through my company, LifeWorks Incorporated, I speak to audiences all around the country. And that's a far stretch. And I have to be quite honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. Being up here on this stage, it's never easy for me. It's never easy for me. But I can say that it's necessary. It's necessary for me to make a contribution and for me to make a difference in the world. And will it be easy for you to reach your goals? No. No, it won't. Will it be a difficult struggle for you to realize your dreams? Yeah, I can say it definitely will be a struggle, but you got to do it anyway. Because actually, a difficult life struggle can actually be spiritually uplifting. So I would suggest that you do it anyway. Take control of your life and give it everything you've got. And if it gets difficult and if it gets rough and tough, don't worry about it. No problem. And how can I say that? Because problems don't exist. Remember what I spoke on earlier. A problem is a perception and not a situation. And I like to conclude with a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And it's a quotation that I apply to my life every day. And it's simply this: make up your mind not merely to overcome 1,000 obstacles, but to win in spite of 1,000 defeats. Thank you.